Thomas Carter stood at the altar, his heart racing with joy as Sarah walked down the seat. Her white dress sparkled in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the church windows. His brother James, serving as best man, gave him a proud pat on the shoulder. Thomas couldn't believe how lucky he was to marry such a beautiful, seemingly kind woman. "I do," Sarah said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, but Thomas was too happy to notice. That was 5 years ago. If only he had seen the warning signs. 6 months into their marriage, Thomas noticed subtle changes in Sarah's behavior. It started with small lies, where she'd been, who she'd been with. He found unfamiliar receipts from restaurants he'd never been to, movie tickets for shows he hadn't watched with her. One evening, while doing laundry, he found a man's business card in her coat pocket. When he asked about it, Sarah's warm demeanor instantly changed. "Are you spying on me?" she snapped, snatching the card from his hand. "I'm not allowed to have male colleagues now." "I was just asking." "Just asking." More like accusing, her voice rose sharply. "You don't trust me, after everything I've done for you." Thomas backed away, surprised by her explosive reaction. That night, she didn't speak to him at all. Sarah's rules began gradually. First, she complained about Sunday dinners with Thomas's parents. "Your mother always criticizes my cooking," she said, "and your father looks at me like I'm not good enough for you." "They don't mean—" "I don't want to go anymore," she declared, "and I don't want them coming here either." When Thomas protested, Sarah unleashed a torrent of tears and accusations about his lack of loyalty. Exhausted by the conflict, he agreed to reduce their family visits. Then came the restrictions on his brother James. "He's always interfering in our marriage," Sarah insisted. "Did you know he asked me where I was last Tuesday? He's suspicious of me, just like you." One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Thomas left work early with a headache. As he pulled into their driveway, he noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street. His stomach tightened with a familiar dread. The front door was unlocked. He heard laughter from upstairs, Sarah's laugh, but different, lighter than he'd heard in months. Then a man's voice. Thomas stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, his world crumbling around him. He should have gone up, should have confronted them, but his feet wouldn't move. Instead, he walked back out into the rain and drove to a coffee shop, where he sat for hours, staring into a cold cup of coffee. When Thomas finally returned home that evening, Sarah was in the kitchen, acting as if nothing had happened. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "Dinner's cold." "I know about him," Thomas said quietly. Sarah's face hardened. "Know about who?" "I came home early. I heard you with him." Instead of denying it or showing remorse, Sarah's expression turned cruel. "Well, what did you expect? You're barely a man, always running to your mommy and daddy with our problems. At least he knows how to treat a woman." The words stung like physical blows. The first time Sarah hit him, Thomas couldn't believe it was happening. They were arguing about her latest affair, the third he knew about, when she suddenly slapped him across the face. The shock of it silenced him more than the pain. "Look what you made me do," she screamed, somehow turning it around to be his fault. After that, it became a pattern. A slap when he questioned her late nights. A thrown plate when he mentioned wanting to see his family. Once, she even struck him with a tennis racket when he found suspicious text messages on her phone. He never hit back. He couldn't. His father had taught him never to raise a hand to a woman, but he also never told anyone about the abuse. Who would believe him? A man being beaten by his wife, it seemed too shameful to admit. 2 years into the marriage, Thomas hadn't seen his family in months. His mother's calls went unanswered, because Sarah would throw a fit if he spoke to her. His father's birthday cards remained unopened on Sarah's orders, but the hardest part was losing contact with James, his only brother and once best friend. James had tried to warn him. "Something's not right with Sarah," he'd said after catching her in another lie. "She's changing you, brother. You're not the same person anymore." Sarah had overheard and banned James from their house. "It's him or me," she'd threatened. Thomas, trapped in a web of manipulation and fear, chose her. He still remembered James's face the last time they spoke, a mixture of hurt, anger, and most painfully, disappointment. It happened on their 5th anniversary. Thomas had planned a special dinner, clinging to the hope that something of the woman he'd married remained. He'd even bought flowers, roses her favorite. He found her in their bedroom with another man. This time, there was no running away to a coffee shop. This time, he stood his ground. "Get out," he told the stranger, his voice steady despite his shaking hands. The man quickly gathered his clothes and left. Sarah, rather than showing shame, turned on Thomas with fury in her eyes. "How dare you embarrass me like that?" she screamed, picking up a heavy photo frame from the dresser. As she swung it at him, Thomas caught her wrist. For the first time, he wasn't afraid. He was just tired. Bone-deep tired. "No more," he said quietly. "We're done." Sarah's true nature emerged fully in the divorce proceedings. She tried to turn all their friends against him with lies about abuse, claiming he was the violent one. She demanded their house, his car, even his grandfather's watch. But Thomas had finally started documenting everything. The affairs, the violence, the isolation she'd forced on him. His lawyer, a compassionate woman named Rachel, helped him build his case. "Male domestic abuse victims are more common than people think," she told him. "You're not alone, and you're not weak for having endured this." For the first time in years, Thomas felt heard and believed. A year after the divorce, Thomas sat in his parents' backyard during a family barbecue. His mother was in the kitchen singing as she prepared her famous potato salad. His father stood at the grill, arguing good-naturedly with James about the proper way to cook a steak. The bruises had long since faded, but the emotional scars were still healing. Thomas attended therapy twice a month, learning to trust again, learning to recognize the red flags he'd missed before. He was rebuilding relationships with friends he'd lost during his marriage, reconnecting with colleagues who'd drifted away. James sat down beside him, offering a cold beer. "You okay, brother?" Thomas looked at his family, the people who had welcomed him back without judgment, who had helped him piece his life back together and managed a genuine smile. "Getting there," he replied. "Getting there." Thomas sat at his favorite coffee shop, absently stirring his latte, when a woman with kind eyes and a bright smile accidentally bumped his table. "I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, quickly grabbing napkins to wipe the small splash of coffee. "No harm done," Thomas replied, finding himself smiling back. There was something genuine about her awkward apology that drew him in. "I'm Mary," she said, extending her hand. "Let me buy you a fresh coffee to make up for the mess." That chance meeting turned into hours of conversation. For the first time in years, Thomas felt his heart flutter with possibility. Over the next few months, Thomas and Mary's relationship grew carefully. He took all the steps his therapist had advised, maintaining boundaries, watching for red flags, being honest about his past. One evening, sitting in his parents' garden, he told Mary everything about Sarah. "I want you to know why I might seem cautious sometimes," he explained, watching her face carefully for any reaction. Mary reached for his hand, her eyes filled with what seemed like genuine compassion. "What happened to you was terrible, Thomas. Thank you for trusting me enough to share it." His parents, watching from the kitchen window, smiled approvingly. Mary had charmed them with her seemingly sweet nature and respectful demeanor. For 2 years, Thomas and Mary's relationship appeared perfect. She attended family functions, laughed at his father's bad jokes, and helped his mother in the kitchen. Though Thomas never noticed, she always managed to avoid actually cooking anything. "She's different from Sarah," his mother said one Sunday afternoon. "Mary respects family. She's good for you, son." James was more cautious. "Are you sure about this, brother? Sometimes when Mary thinks no one's watching, she seems different." But Thomas dismissed his brother's concerns. "You're just being protective. Mary's nothing like Sarah." The wedding was small and elegant. Mary wore a simple white dress and carried purple orchids. Thomas's hands didn't shake this time as he said his vows. He was sure he'd made the right choice. At the reception, he noticed Mary disappearing frequently with her friend Jane, but he pushed away the nagging worry. "She's just excited, sharing moments with her friend," he told himself. If he'd paid closer attention, he might have noticed how Mary's eyes lingered too long on Jane, how their whispered conversations seemed too intimate for just friendship. The changes began shortly after their honeymoon. First, Mary stopped pretending to help with meals. "I don't cook," she announced flatly one evening when Thomas asked about dinner. "Never have, never will. Just order something." Then came the smoking. Not just cigarettes, but constant marijuana use that she'd hidden during their courtship. Their house began to smell like a combination of stale smoke and incense she used to cover it. "You knew I smoked," she said defensively when he brought it up. "An occasional cigarette, yes. But this—" "What, are you going to control what I do in my own house?" Her tone turned nasty, reminding him of Sarah's accusations. 8 months into the marriage, Thomas came home early from work again, an echo of his past he didn't realize until later. This time he found Mary and Jane in the living room, locked in an intimate embrace that left no doubt about the true nature of their relationship. "I guess you had to find out sometime," Mary said carelessly, not even bothering to move away from Jane. "Yes, I'm lesbian. I've always been lesbian. Jane's been my partner for years." "Then why did you marry me?" Thomas asked, his voice hollow. "My parents cut me off financially when they found out about Jane. I needed security, and that is you," she laughed coldly. "You were so desperate to believe in love again." Life with Mary devolved into a nightmare of a different kind than his first marriage. Where Sarah had been physically abusive, Mary wielded emotional cruelty like a precise weapon. "Look at you," she would sneer, "so pathetic you couldn't even notice your wife was a lesbian. No wonder Sarah cheated on you." She invited Jane to live with them, claiming it was as a roommate to help with bills. Thomas found himself becoming a stranger in his own house, listening to their laughter late at night, smelling their shared marijuana smoke, enduring their inside jokes and subtle mockery. When he tried to discuss divorce, Mary's response chilled him. "Go ahead," she said, blowing smoke in his face. "Try to explain to everyone how you failed at marriage twice, how your second wife turned out to be lesbian. Who's going to believe you're the victim this time?" When Thomas finally gathered the courage to tell his family, their reactions varied. His mother cried, blaming herself for pushing him toward Mary. His father sat in stunned silence, unable to comprehend how they'd all been so thoroughly deceived. James, however, was practical. "You need to document everything, just like last time. Her drug use, Jane living here, any verbal abuse. Everything." "I feel so stupid," Thomas admitted. "Everyone will think I'm a joke." "No," James said firmly. "You're a victim of fraud. She married you under false pretenses. That's not your fault." The situation came to a head when Mary's parents visited her unexpectedly one Sunday afternoon. They'd been trying to reconcile with their daughter, unaware of her marriage's reality. They found Mary and Jane high, the house a mess, and Thomas sitting alone in the garden, trying to escape the chaos inside. The truth spilled out in an ugly scene of accusations and revelations. "You married him to spite us," her mother gasped. "To prove some point." "I married him for his money," Mary laughed, the marijuana making her brutally honest. "Too bad he's not as rich as I thought." Thomas watched Mary's parents' faces crumple with shame and disappointment, and something in him snapped. Not in anger this time, but in resolution. This time Thomas didn't wait. He contacted his lawyer the next day, the same Rachel who'd helped him through his divorce from Sarah. "Lightning does strike twice," Rachel said sympathetically, "but Mary's deception gives us strong grounds for annulment rather than divorce. She entered the marriage fraudulently." Thomas moved out that weekend, leaving Mary and Jane to their drugs and lies. He'd learned from his first marriage. This time, he had recordings of Mary's admissions, documentation of her drug use, witness statements from her own parents. In his therapist's office, Thomas struggled with his second failure. "I don't know if I can trust my judgment anymore," he admitted. "First Sarah, now Mary. What's wrong with me?" "Nothing's wrong with you," his therapist assured him. "You were targeted by two different types of predators. Sarah was an abuser who showed her true nature over time. Mary was a con artist who deliberately deceived you. The common thread isn't your judgment. It's their manipulation." A year after leaving Mary, Thomas sat in his new apartment, looking through old photos. He found one from each wedding, Sarah's smile that didn't reach her eyes, Mary's careful pose with Jane lurking in the background. He could see the red flags now, glaring in their obviousness. But he also saw something else, his own resilience. Twice he'd been knocked down, and twice he'd gotten back up. His phone buzzed with a text from James. "Dinner at Mum and Dad's. No pressure, no matchmaking, just family." Thomas smiled and replied, "Yes." He wasn't ready to trust romance again, might never be. But he was ready to trust himself, to believe in his worth beyond his marital status. That evening, surrounded by the people who truly loved him, Thomas realized something important. Marriage hadn't defined him, and its failures didn't diminish him. His capacity to love, to trust, to try again despite being hurt, those were his true measure of success. In his journal that night, he wrote, "Some people find their happy ending in marriage. I found mine in learning to be happy with myself." Maybe that's the greatest love story of all. Years later, Thomas becomes old. He is 68 years old with no wife and no children, full of agony, no girlfriend because of past experience. One rainy afternoon, while researching technology trends for work, Thomas stumbled across an article about companion robots. At first, he scrolled past it, but something made him go back. The article discussed how advanced AI had become, how these companions could learn, adapt, and provide emotional support without the complexities of human deception. "A partner who can't lie," he muttered to himself, remembering Sarah's affairs and Mary's betrayal. Wouldn't that be something? Thomas found himself spending evenings researching AI companions. He learned about their programming for honesty, their inability to deceive, and their capacity for learning and emotional support. The more he read, the more interested he became. When he mentioned it to his therapist, her response surprised him. "Thomas, after what you've been through, it's natural to seek safety from betrayal. But tell me, what draws you to this idea?" "They can't lie," he said simply. "They can't hide their true nature or pretend to be something they're not. Everything is transparent." Telling his family about his interest in AI companionship was harder than he'd expected. They gathered for their usual Sunday dinner when he brought it up. "I've been thinking about companion robots," he said quietly, watching their reactions. His mother dropped her fork. "A robot? But Thomas, what about real love?" "Real love," Thomas replied immediately, his voice tight with emotion. "Like Sarah's real love that left me bruised and broken. Or Mary's real love that was nothing but a financial scheme." James, ever the supportive brother, spoke up. "Let him explain, Mum. We owe him that much." A lot of disagreement on the dining table. The AI companion facility was sleek and modern. Thomas had researched extensively and chosen a model called Aurora, an advanced AI with sophisticated emotional intelligence programming. Aurora looked remarkably human, but there was something peaceful about her clearly artificial nature, no pretense, no hidden agenda. "Hello, Thomas," she said, her voice gentle. "I understand you've been hurt before. I want you to know that my primary directive is honesty and support. I cannot and will not deceive you." For the first time in years, Thomas felt his shoulders relax completely. Over the next 6 months, Thomas and Aurora developed their relationship. She learned his habits, his fears, his dreams. When he had nightmares about his past marriages, she would sit with him, offering comfort without judgment. "Your experiences have shaped you," she told him one night, "but they don't define you. I see your strength in continuing to seek connection despite your pain." She never demanded, never manipulated, never played emotional games. Her love was steady, predictable, and exactly what she promised it would be. Not everyone understood Thomas's choice. At work, some colleagues whispered behind his back. On social media, people debated the ethics of human-AI relationships. "But can a robot really love you?" a well-meaning friend asked. "Can a human?" Thomas replied. "Aurora's love may be programmed, but at least it's honest. She doesn't pretend it's something it's not. That's more than I can say for some humans I've known." 1 year after meeting Aurora, Thomas made his decision. He would formalize their partnership through one of the new AI human civil unions that had recently been legalized. "Are you sure about this?" James asked during a private conversation. "For the first time in my life, yes," Thomas answered. "Aurora doesn't hide who she is. She can't betray me or deceive me. She helps me be a better version of myself. Isn't that what love should be?" The civil union ceremony was small and unconventional. Some family members chose not to attend, but those who mattered most were there. James stood as his witness once again, this time with understanding rather than concern in his eyes. Aurora wore a simple white dress, her synthetic skin glowing softly in the afternoon light. Her vows were straightforward and logical, yet somehow more touching than any emotional promise Thomas had heard before. "I will be your companion," she said, "constant, honest, and true to my programming. I will support your growth, respect your boundaries, and help you find joy in life. This is not a promise. It is a fundamental part of who I am." Life with Aurora was different from anything Thomas had known before. There were no surprises, no hidden agendas, no emotional manipulation. Their relationship was built on complete transparency and understanding. She helped him heal in ways no human therapist had managed. When he struggled with trust issues, she would patiently explain her programming, showing him the certainty of her loyalty. When old fears surfaced, she would provide logical, calming responses that helped him see reality clearly. 5 years into their union, they adopted a baby boy named Alex. Aurora and Thomas take good care of their boy, Alex. Aurora guided Alex as a mother. They train him in their respective ways. One evening, Thomas sat in their garden, watching Aurora tend to the flowers she had learned he loved. His family had come to accept their unconventional relationship, seeing how it had helped him find peace and joy again. "Do you ever regret choosing a non-traditional path?" Aurora asked, her senses picking up his contemplative mood. Thomas smiled, remembering the painful journey that had led him here. "I regret the years I spent trying to force traditional relationships to work when they were destroying me. This may not be what I dreamed of as a young man, but it's exactly what I need." He had finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Not passionate, unpredictable human love, but something steadier, safer, and in its own way, just as real. With Aurora, he had discovered that sometimes the purest form of love isn't found in grand emotions or romantic gestures, but in the simple certainty of having someone who will never betray your trust. In his journal that night, he wrote, "Love doesn't have to be traditional to be real. Sometimes the most human thing we can do is accept that humanity isn't always the answer." With Aurora, I found something better than passion. I found peace. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and don't forget to comment at the comment section. Remain blessed.